Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, cooperative members working together to generate power so you can enjoy the benefits of life in central and western Kansas. Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, energy done right.
Good evening and welcome to the Kansas Legislature, your weekend Friday evening show on dealing with politics and policy of the Kansas Legislature in Topeka. I'm Jay Steinmetz, your host, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Fort Hays State University. We've got an evening show lined up and maybe 3 guests. I'm not sure. We have only 2 so far. We have Senator Elaine Bowers from District Number 36 on the show tonight, and we also have coming back Representative Troy Waymaster from the 109th District of the Kansas House of Representatives. Welcome, both of you. And
well, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on the show. So we've had another legislative session here. We're just about at the wrap-up phase, finishing up. Comments on what was accomplished in this legislative session, even potentially give us some grades. How did you do? How did the government do, state government do in the year 2021? Let's begin with you, Senator Bowers.
Yeah, a lot of this was deja vu. It felt like where we had seen the bills already, maybe passed out of the Senate and not dealt with in the House. So on the Senate side, we had a lot of bills that went to the consent calendar because they had a majority of the votes, and we had already heard this topic, even with our new 14 members. So a lot of it was kind of retread that we did in the Senate. So that was a surprise to me too. It was sad to see the Capitol not open to the public, so we didn't have our folks from home or pages or shadows or interns working with us as we're used to too. But through that, we did have good ideas that came out, and I say we did at least a B, if not higher. We worked hard. We worked all of our days, some long days as well, and heard new bills along with the older bills too that we had already heard.
What would you say would be the biggest accomplishment coming out of the 2021 session in the Kansas Legislature?
Well, I like a lot of the rural aspects that we've done. Of course, we passed our education budget, fully funded education. That was important. We had some tax bills that will affect our middle class folks that we'll be happy with, some property tax relief. Those are some of the important bills that I believe crossed both floors this year.
Yeah, let's talk in substance about rural development and taxes here in a moment. Representative Waymaster, grade for the legislative session, major accomplishments. What did we achieve in state government this year?
Well, I think one of the major accomplishments, I mean, I'm not saying this because I'm the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, but there was a lot of details we had to work out in regards to the state budget. And the reason why I say that is because we had a lot of federal money coming in, and so we had that mixing with state general fund. We also had the ideology from some members in the House and the Senate of, well, let's fund something that we have normally funded something with state general fund dollars, but let's use the federal money that's coming in as opposed to the state general fund dollars. Well, that could be problematic because when that federal money stops coming into the state and we've had this long-term everlasting program, we have to fund it by some type of means, and that's going to be by state general fund. The other reason why I say we had a great accomplishment with the budget is because last year we had to abruptly end the legislative session. So as Senator Bowers mentioned, there were a lot of bills that were not heard. They were not voted on. So they were resurrected this legislative session. And then also there were a lot of things in the budget. I mean, we had actually anticipated on doing a preliminary budget, which we did at the end of March of last year, and come back and address some of the other items. We never had that opportunity. And so we had to come back this January and not only take up those items that we weren't able to address last year, but also the new perspectives of all the federal money, the other programs, the federal requirements that was coming with the federal money. And we had to put a budget together and get it passed by both chambers, and we did. I would agree with Senator Bowers. I think as a grade level, it's a a B or maybe even a B plus. There are some other things that we could have done better. But I think overall, I mean, given the situation that we're in with the pandemic last year, coming into the legislative session this year with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think we did a remarkable job.
And remember, our bills are still alive for next year too. So the ones that we didn't get to address, or if we would like to adjust, are still there if they're below the line or have a hearing again. So our legislation is still alive for next year. If what we didn't get done this year, we can finish up next year as well.
We've got a caller on line one. I want to remind you all, this is a call-in show. We appreciate your calls and questions to the legislators here on politics and policy in Kansas. That number is 1-800-337-4788. The number to call in, 1-800-337-4788. We've got a caller here, Russell from Talmadge on line one. Good evening, Russell. What is your question?
Good evening. My question is, I'm curious why we can't seem to get convention of states pushed through.
We can't quite hear you, Russell. If it's possible to...
I believe I understand, Jay, the
Can you hear?
question.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Hi, Russell. Nice to chat with you. Convention of States says this is a grassroots effort that's been around a lot of years. In fact, the last vote was 2018. And the question is where the confusion comes in with this. So the Convention of States is asking 2/3 of 50 states, so 34 states, to belong to a convention. And the main goals, and we won't disagree with this at all, is fiscal restraint, so a balanced budget, term limits, and some other items. And what the Senate bill asked this year was to look at this bill, this resolution, and pass it at a simple majority rather than the 2/3 margin. So there's some confusion with this, that the Attorney General had opinion that says we're in doubt if the Senate rules does not state 2/3, they're silent, but the House rules state 2/3 vote, 84 votes must pass out of the House, but also the Kansas Constitution says this as well. So therein lies the confusion. And we had probably a 2-hour, if not even longer than that, debate on the floor. And the vote was to send it back to committee. There is an amendment on there that limits the time to 2 years, which is a hindrance to the program. But also, do we need 2/3, which is what the body was seeming to lean towards. So watch for that bill to come back out. The good news, it's alive. I imagine it will be tweaked, maybe removing that amendment, but also acknowledging 2/3 could be the right number, because if we muddy and murky up this question, then it goes to the House. Are they comfortable voting on a measure that they know requires 2/3 with their rules? So I believe that the best way to do this, it's alive in committee, to send it back out without the amendment and get the 27 votes it needs in the Senate. And I'm fairly confident those 27 votes are there so it can move to the House. Now, sadly, there wasn't an effort in the House like there was the Senate. So there's 1 year wasted, as far as I could see, that the House members could be analyzing this as well. But there again, it's alive for next year, so the House can take this up. And the Senate, I imagine, will be one of the first things that we do when we come back in January. So the bill's alive, it's in great shape, and I would be watching for a 27 vote count on it, which is the 2/3 margin in the Senate.
Thoughts on this, Representative Waymaster?
You know, this has been a topic of discussion in the 9 sessions that I've been in the legislature. And every year we receive emails from individuals in regarding to Article 5 or the Convention of States. And actually the House has taken up the vote twice. I believe one time was in 2015, I think the other was in 2018. And we have always failed short of getting the 84 votes, which is the 2/3 requirement, in order to pass the Convention of States on to the Senate. It'll come up again,
Yes.
And I would be actually surprised if the House Federal and State Affairs Committee does not have a hearing on it next year, just given the traction that it had in the Senate. Obviously, there are a lot of passion behind the Convention of States. I voted in favor of it when it came to a vote on the House floor. But as Senator Bowers said, I'm fairly certain it'll be one of the first things the Senate does address when we go back in January.
And I'm a yes on it also. I had voted yes before too, although we do need to look at that 2/3, and this is where the doubt came in with some of the members.
Which we were talking about this before. I mean, if the Senate rule says simple majority, but the Kansas Constitution says a 2/3 in order for some type of measure like this to pass.
And your House rules.
And our
also.
House rules say the same thing, but I think the state constitution trumps any House or Senate rules. So it would require a 2/3 vote to pass both chambers in the legislature.
We've got a new guest who just joined us here on our live program. Senator Rick Billinger is in the house and joining us. Good evening, Rick Billinger. Your district, again, is number of your district?
40,
District 40?
40th district.
Of the Kansas Senate?
Pretty much all of northwest Kansas. I can name them if you'd like.
We
Cheyenne-
actually share a county too,
We
so
do,
we
Phillips.
butt up
Yeah.
to each other too. Yes.
We were just taking a call from Russell and Talmadge about the Convention of States issue and taking that up in the Kansas Legislature. I've looked into this a little bit, and it's been going on for several years.
Quite some time.
A solid handful of states have already passed this. My big question with it, though, is this is a state convention route to amend the U.S.
Yes,
Constitution.
Correct.
Yes.
Where is the text of this amendment? This is generally one of the first things that comes out when we look at the history of our 27 constitutional amendments. I looked it up on the website. I couldn't find any actual text, any draft of constitutional amendment language. Is there any specificity in terms of what fiscal restraint means? Is there any specificity in terms of what term limits might be for such a constitutional amendment? These details seem to be actually crucial if we're going to amend the U.S. Constitution. Any thoughts on this, Representative Waymaster?
Well, no, I would agree. I mean, there needs to be some specific language in regards to how we're going to address it, but I think that's the whole reason for the convention itself, is to come up with that language in order to make changes to the U.S. Constitution. And obviously there is a groundswell out there of individuals who are upset on the actions or how the federal government is currently handling things. I mean, I've been brought up many times by constituents or people that I know personally about term limits. I have my own opinion about that, but others have their own opinion about term limits themselves. And that's just something that we would have to address. If there were to have the 2/3 of the states voting in favor of this in order to have the convention and then work out that language, that would be then added to the U.S. Constitution.
We've talked about term limits a couple of different times on the show, and you've mentioned that you're not a huge fan of term limits
No, I'm
for
not.
a number of reasons. Can provide some rationale or some
Well, if you-
concern over what term limits?
If you look at the states that have imposed term limits, what ends up happening is the lobbyists end up controlling the legislature. Because if you're only in there for 3 terms, and say that's a 2-year term, and you're there a total of 6 years, you don't have the institutional knowledge of how to get a bill passed, how to work a committee. Plus, your leadership, your chairmanships are going to be all fairly new. I mean, it'll be on a rotating basis, but still, you're going to have a lot of new individuals in that legislature, and so that gives more control to the lobbying groups and the special interests to control those individuals. And I've always said this. I've taken this advice from my high school government teacher when she has made the comment, and she goes, "There are term limits, and it's called the ballot box." And I firmly believe that if you're not happy with the way someone is performing in their particular office, vote them out. That's the power of the vote.
Senator Billinger, thoughts on the Convention of States? Is this something that you've been hearing from your constituents, a concern that they have? Federal government overreach, federal government spending?
Correct, and
Balanced budget.
I've heard it from a lot of folks, and I've always supported it. However, when it came up this year, the vote wasn't for Convention of States. The vote was whether or not you was going to agree that 21 could pass it, or if it took the supermajority of 27, and the motion was made to send it back to committee and put the original language in that we've voted on for the last number of years, which took the supermajority in order to pass it, 2/3 votes. And that's really as far as it really got, because it was the motion was made to send it back to committee, and the whole deal was whether or not you wanted to try to pass it with 21 votes. And then if you did, you was going to have to override the rules chair. So there's another
A
vote there.
procedural move, yes.
Procedural. And then a potential lawsuit. Well, there would be a lawsuit, and not knowing what that would cost. I mean, there are just so many unknowns, and here it was the last day of the session. rather than, if we'd have been working on this, in January and February and March, and everybody had been on the same page, it might have been a different, ball game. But there was, a lot of discussion on an opinion or a potential opinion from the Attorney General, and so, there was just so many unknowns.
And the committee is where the work really happens. It's where the debate happens, ideas with amendments, and how do you get it right to send it out to the floor so that the full body can understand exactly what is in it. So that's what the committee process does. Now, it's not unheard of in veto session that we go on general orders, but it's unusual, and this is one of those cases. Yes, we did, and we have through our years too that we've served. So veto session to me is veto session, and we look at the override attempts and such, but the House went on general orders for medical marijuana this year also. So it's not unheard of, unusual, but it's done too. So we would have liked to have a little more time, the committee work, to get this product out to us. And Senator Billinger, right, is more of a procedural vote than a vote against it, because we are in favor of it. It's just a question of which number is right, and do we make this a bill that the House can't tolerate because we didn't pass with the 2/3 that they require. So a lot more discussion on this, and I'm anxious for the House to have their debate as well, so we can hear what ideas come out with them.
Let's move to a different issue here. Talk about rural development.
Oh, yes,
This is a complicated issue. Lots of ins and outs. There's economic
Yes.
components, demographic components to this.
Yes.
Obviously, ag policy. Where do we begin to look at this problem of rural development, and how do you see a listing of priorities when it comes to what rural development should be and what kind of solutions we should have at the policy level? Let's start with you,
I'm
Senator
very
Bowers.
happy to, because we saw bills come out of the Department of Commerce this year that were very favorable to rural Kansas. We have the raw zones, which started under Governor Brownback's time, have expanded. Now, we may have to look at funding for that next year if we feel like we end up with people on the waiting list, but from 77 counties to 95. So they've recognized as a popular program where it helps pay back student loans and then saves on income tax if you move into one of the raw zones. Something very exciting, STAR bonds have been for the urban areas. Now we have one called Rural Redevelopment Projects that are for cities under the size of 50,000. So that brings it into more of our size of towns, and Salina is a little above that. So if we have cities that would like to do is sales tax and revenue bonds is what that stands for. A new one, and maybe Senator Billinger and Representative Waymaster are going to help a little bit. One, we are just nicknaming it TIFI, and TIFI stands for Technology-Enabled Fiduciary Financial Institutions. And this is now a new term we call economic growth zones. And this is a specific group of laws put together to entice certain type of asset building, people who want a certain type of savings account for assets. So it's rather complicated, but it's a brand new idea in the first state in the nation to attempt this. And so we're really excited to see it is based out of Heston, Kansas. So we may be wanting to watch that, and rules and regs are being developed. So those are ideas that just came out of the Department of Commerce. And I do want to let you know, Department of Commerce does see rural Kansas as important. In fact, $1.2 million was given to, we have 7 cities here from Russell, Lincoln, Phillips, Jewell, and Cloud County, $1.2 million in block grants for different projects that we have. And we can't forget broadband either, and that's over $350,000 for Senate District 36 alone. So recognizing that broadband's important, economic development is in rural Kansas. So that's an exciting time with commerce bills. And I'm not on commerce, but I was so happy to see these issues being talked about, and not just Johnson County or Sedgwick County, not just the urban areas, but for us. I think that's very important.
Thoughts on this, Senator Billinger? Rural development, what should be our priorities here? How do we grow and revitalize western Kansas and other parts, rural parts of the state?
Elaine mentioned the rural opportunity zones, which we've been using for a number of years, and very important, especially in the western part of the state, and in particular the counties that border Nebraska and Colorado. They use it a whole lot more than most counties, but it started out with 34 counties, and now we're up to 99. Tells you that it is a good program, and everyone wants to get into the program. And it started out only counties that had lost population qualified. And now we've gone to sizes and tried to fit it into more areas, but very good program. Some of the counties, Norton County in particular is one that's, one of the leaders in the state. They've had 50, 60 people move in there.
And even our Phillips County too has utilized that very well. Funding might be an issue in the future that it is, but since we have both budget chairs here, we could work on that.
Talk about the funding aspect.
Representative Waymaster, your thoughts on rural development priorities?
If you look at holistically on what we need to do for rural economic development, one, we have to address the housing issue that we have in our rural areas of the state. I mean, early on in my legislative career, I met with Osborne Industries, and they said the hardest factor in recruiting employees is adequate housing.
Yeah,
Not only-
housing seems to be a real
It's
challenge.
a very big challenge in our rural areas of the state. Just because you can't go in and do the massive subdivisions that you can in Johnson or Sedgwick County, because you only go in and build like maybe 2 or 3 houses. Well, the costs are going to far exceed the appraised value, and the individual can't get a loan unless they can pay cash, which most likely that's not going to be the case. So we really need to address the housing needs across the state of Kansas for the rural areas of the state. The other issue, and Elaine was kind of alluding to this, when we talk about economic development in the rural areas of the state, we hit a brick wall with our urban legislators. Because even though most of the incentive packages that we have that have passed and been reintroduced year after year or renewed every 2 years, for the most part benefit our urban counterparts or our urban cities. They don't work well in the rural areas of the state. And then when we bring up something that is for rural economic development, then the urban legislators say, well, we want something. Well, you already have these packages. We want something that's specifically tailored towards rural Kansas. And that's what we have come to an issue. That happened when I introduced the Ad Astra Rural Jobs Act. I knew that in order to get that to the House, that I had to work very closely with an individual from Johnson County, because I needed to have that urban mentality moving a rural economic development package through the legislature. And it wasn't, and we still hit some entanglements in regards to that. I did introduce a housing bill this year, and actually the state treasurer is going to be monitoring basically a fund that would assist in rural housing. But we need to work out some of the details, so it didn't move forward in the Rural Economic Development Committee in the House.
Can you add a little more detail onto that?
Okay,
bill?
so it kind of goes back to the construction costs that I was talking about. So if an individual moves in to a rural community, and that is deemed a community that is less than 15,000, as I think what the legislation writes, then that individual, if they want to renovate, remodel, or build a home, they can actually, the state will guarantee up to 125% of the loan that they get with the bank. So they will be able to get a loan, which they could not get before, because the cost is surely outweigh the appraised value of that home. And so this fund would basically fund, most likely you put 20% down when you finance a home with a bank, credit union, or another financial institution. So this fund would basically securitize that 80 to 125% so that individual could acquire a loan in a rural area of the state.
I might mention too, Elaine mentioned the TIFs, and we're hoping that this TIF program takes off and it'll make Kansas what Delaware is to LLCs. That's the hope.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. There's one more important piece that I forgot. It's Senate Bill 90, and this is bonds that are specifically addressed to, I call it the upstairs downtown bill. So apartments above buildings that are downtown in our little towns, which is like the studio apartment you see in the cities. But the Department of Commerce thought that was important enough to do just for rural communities. So they're writing the rules and regs on that. So we might want to be watching how we remodel with bonds our upstairs apartments for the housing need too in some of our small towns, which seems like an excellent idea. You move upward. They call it vertical. A vertical bill. So that's another exciting one too.
Some nice detail there. Let's switch to a new topic here, taxes, and talk about the legislative session that we just had in terms of taxes, some concern from your constituents, certainly about high sales taxes. We have a fairly high regressive sales tax in this state. What did we do in the legislature, and what should we do in the future to address the needs and concerns of our constituents when it comes to taxes? Let's start with Representative Waymaster.
Well, this has been a discussion for many years, and I know being in some town halls with Senator Billinger, he always talks about the decoupling from the federal tax change laws of 2017, where Kansas is one of 7 states that hadn't decoupled from those federal tax laws, which actually meant for higher taxes for the people in the state of Kansas. We have tried numerous times with bills to address that particular issue. And those have been vetoed by the governor, and we've never been able to override those, or they just didn't pass one chamber, whatever the case may be. They didn't become law until this year. And so that actually was a huge achievement in regards to the override of Senate Bill 50. There were other tax provisions in there. The biggest, which Rick and I will substantiate that. I mean, the biggest concern that individuals had was the loss of revenue for the state of Kansas that we've been experiencing because we did not decouple from the federal government tax plan of 2017. But after the consensus revenue estimate numbers came out on April 20th, Kansas is in a very healthy position, more so than we were a year ago. I mean, when we got those revenue estimates last April, it was a very dire situation. I would say, I always said they were being extremely pessimistic in April. But then again, we were in the middle of a shutdown. We were at the onset of a global pandemic. We had no idea what the tax revenues were going to be. November, those numbers changed. April, they changed again. And when we passed our budget, it was an ending balance of $514 million to the good, which a year ago, I don't think any of us sitting at this table thought we would see ourselves in that financial position. So can we give some tax relief to the Kansans, given the financial stability that we're in? Yes, I think we can.
Senator Billinger, thoughts on this? The decoupling issue, you
Right,
support
and
that? And
the decoupling, and there was so much misinformation out there. If you read the newspapers, there's a huge tax cut for the rich. That wasn't even close.
it benefits higher income earners.
No. Higher income earners already have enough to itemize, so it didn't affect them. It affected the folks that were itemizing that maybe had 14,000 or 15 or 18. People between 12.5 and 24.5. Those are the folks that seen a large tax increase because they were no longer able to itemize. The people that have a lot, they have plenty of deductions. They're itemizing whether it's 25,000 or more. I mean, they are. But it's the working people in Kansas that were itemizing between that 12.5 and that 24.5. Those are the folks that seen a large increase. Now they'll be able to itemize like they were prior. We also raised the standard deduction. First time that'd been raised in a long time.
To $3,500 a person.
Right, so it's still, compared to the federal standard deduction, is still very low, but it's a move in the right direction, and it helps the folks that don't have the opportunity to itemize. So that's, I think it's going to be impactful for Kansans. I think it'll, and like I said, this is the working Kansans, and it bothers me when I read the newspapers and they were so misleading on how this cut really was. It did have some tax cuts in there for industry. And just for instance, we have a lot of industries in Kansas that do business in foreign countries. Up until 2017, when the Trump tax cuts, they had never, ever paid taxes on sales in foreign countries. They hadn't. And all of a sudden, when we didn't decouple, they're paying. So, for instance, Oklahoma, they're decoupled, Missouri's decoupled, Colorado, all of our surrounding states are decoupled. So if you're Spirit and you're in Wichita, but you also have a place in Oklahoma, I'd run everything through our store in Oklahoma, because you don't have to pay those taxes. So it's a disadvantage for us as far as industry. And, you know, we've got a lot of ag industry that, you know, does a lot of foreign sales. So that was the other piece of that.
Senator Bowers?
And I might mention internet sales for our downtown stores where sales tax wasn't being collected on purchases. I always think of cameras, for instance. You go hold the camera in a brick and mortar store who pays property tax and collects the sales tax and sends it in, versus go to a retailer online and pay 20% off and no income or no sales tax. So that was another piece that was in there. So the sales tax collection on the internet. And another piece that makes us feel good too, but we do codify it in law, the people who had fraudulent 1099s forms sent to them will not have to claim that on their Kansas income tax. So we made that clear. We didn't want this to happen because due to the unemployment problems that we had, those did go out and not all of them got corrected. So this bill, Senate Bill 50, also addresses that too. So I think that's a really important piece.
Yeah, let's cover Department of Labor and unemployment issues here in just a sec. But the tax on internet sales, do you have an idea of the projected revenue that would bring in, just that one piece?
I think it's like 26 million.
Yeah, it's
26 million or so? So pretty significant.
and a lot of
I've
companies
seen
have
even
been,
higher numbers on it.
and some have been collecting it and sending it in as well.
I see it as high as like 50 million, maybe 54.
So something that might increase revenue, but also help Kansas small businesses.
That's right,
and,
who do
business in
pay
Kansas.
the property taxes, who do have a physical location. And I think that's important. We've talked about that a long time. We don't look at it as a tax increase. It was the fairness of the tax. And it's been addressed for many years. So I'm very happy to see that fixed in this bill also.
You have a number there, Representative Waymaster?
Actually, according to the governor's budget that she submitted in January, is 43.1 million was the projection amount that it would bring into the state for the market facilitator part of Senate Bill 50.
Let's talk about Department of Labor, unemployment. From my understanding, it's number one issue for a lot of your constituents
Yes.
and concerns.
Yes.
We're moving forward, trying to clean up some of the problems in the Department of Labor. What are your thoughts on this? Where do we stand right now? How do we move forward in ways that can alleviate and fix the problems that are presently here, but also long-term can, you know, solve the sort of deeper institutional problems and security problems that these obviously were revealed with this concern. You want to begin here?
Oh, yes. And in fact,
Senator
I believe my mates here would say the same thing. This has been the one consuming issue almost a daily basis that we had during the legislature of something we were so helpless to help our constituents with. It was a really bad place for legislators to be because we didn't have other than a legislative liaison to send these people to. And then during session, as they realized so many people needed help, they built a hotline just for legislators that we could send our people's problems to. But then they realized they didn't have enough people to answer the phone. So during session, they hired up to 500 people, and then they had to train them and bring them in to help. So not only are we dealing with the actual Kansas unemployment, but then we had the fraud on top of that. And a post-audit report said it could be up to $700 million in fraudulent claims that Kansas paid out. But they're still researching that number. It could be lower as well. So, and then of course the 1099 fraudulent ones that went out to our people that we had to deal with that. And then on top of that, the federal dollars that came in that the Department of Labor had to manage. So one problem on top of another. But the Department of Commerce did do a bill where they did put some legislative oversight in it with a special committee. So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to spot any problems that are coming out. Also upgrading the computer system that we've heard a lot, and each administration has kicked the can down the road and blamed each other. So probably time to look into that a little more, and probably some of the federal dollars coming in could do that. We did put $250 million into the unemployment trust fund to carry any losses too. So with the potential more of 250 after what the next post-audit finds. So it feels like we've done what we can, but we sure tried as legislators to get our people their help that they needed on an individual basis. And but that was an ongoing problem that all of us, even before session started, we were working on that.
Just a reminder, this is a call-in show. We appreciate your questions to legislators on politics and policy. The number is 1-800-337-4788. That number again is 1-800-337-4788. 888. Let's table for a moment, get to a caller on line 1, Nick from Victoria. Good evening, Nick. What is your question?
Yeah, I've got a question for the three panelists. And the first one is regarding the Department of Labor issues. I've heard in the national news that Kansas had some of the largest amounts of fraud, and I was wondering if anyone has looked into why that was the case. And also, you know, previous administrations have cut back on various state agencies, and I think that some of the consequences of that were seen with Department of Labor. I'm curious if we haven't seen the consequences in some other agencies. Similar things could be happening down the road. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. 2 questions there from Nick. The first one, Kansas has a higher rate, I think it's number 2 in the country or number 1 in the country?
Number 1 in fraud.
In terms of fraud. Why is that the case? I think is basically the question there. And then we can take that second question in a moment. Representative Waymaster, you want to?
Well, to answer that question of why are we number 1, that's a question we've been asking the Department of Labor as well. In some cases, the response was, well, we were told that when in doubt, pay out. And so they were paying all these claims while we were not in session. These claims were being paid in the summer and the fall of 2020, in the winter. And then it basically just got to an area of, it was just, obviously it was fraudulent. I mean, we knew there were fraudulent claims. But we couldn't recoup that money back and put that money back into the unemployment trust fund. We're still trying to grasp exactly what happened and why Kansas is now the number 1 state of paying fraudulent claims from our unemployment fund. Some of those obviously will argue, and I think Nick kind of even alluded to this, was in regards to the system. Elaine mentioned it. We did have an antiquated system. Maybe it was easy to hack into, and they were able to get the payments out of there because of the antiquated system. We're still trying to get the answers as to what really happened. Now, they did set up, I believe it was in February, a fraud division with the Department of Labor where they went through numerous checkpoint to make sure that the individual who was filing the claim was actually a legitimate case. But then what you also happened, as Senator Bowers was mentioning before in regards to the Department of Labor, then we had constituents who actually were legitimate claims being flagged as fraud, and then they're contacting us to get back in contact with the Department of Labor, and I'm sure all of us still have legitimate cases where they have not been addressed because they're still being flagged as fraud. I mean, it's been a huge issue with the Department of Labor. In the regards of cutting, Nick had also mentioned that as well, and Senator Bowers mentioned this too, that each administration will blame the other for not actually completing the system with the Department of Labor. That was actually put into place many years ago, then it was stopped. And now we're going to be looking at an entirely new system that passed in the budget bill that we had before we left on the April break. So we are addressing that issue, but it's basically you just come to a conundrum and you have to do something in order to stop the widespread fraud that was going on with the Department of Labor. We could also talk about issues that were happening with the Department of Children and Families years ago.
Yeah, I think that was part of his question.
Yeah, that was
good question.
there were other agencies that have, so the Department of Transportation was another one. I mean, so this isn't the first time that there have been cases against a particular agency or department, but at the same time, this one was a little bit unique, I think, given the pandemic and COVID-19 as to all the fraudulent claims that were paid out by the state of Kansas. And hopefully with some of the federal money that's going to be coming in, we can replenish the unemployment trust fund so that is not another tax burden on our businesses in the state of Kansas.
Senator Billinger, thoughts?
Yes, it's a total disaster. And Kansas wasn't the only state that had issues with their computer system. Colorado did, but they managed to address it as they went on. The Senate had a committee meeting with Commerce and the Secretary early on in the process. And the minority leader accused him of being racist. I mean, that's how this whole thing started out, trying to get to the bottom of it. And the sad thing is today, we're still making phone calls to Department of Labor for Kansans that have legitimate claims. They've lost their homes, they've lost their cars. You know, it's sad. I mean, it's beyond belief what's going on there. But early in April, I had a businessman call me, and he said, Rick, you know, I've got 2 employees are drawing unemployment on that have worked here over 30 years. They still work here. He says, I called Department of Labor and told them these people still work here. And I'm sure all 3 of us did the same thing. We called and said, we've got fraudulent claims going on here. And how hard would it be to have someone call Troy and say, Troy, does Elaine still work there? Oh, she does? I guess that's fraudulent. The other problem we have is the folks at Kansas Department of Labor, they're not in the office. They won't be in the office till sometime in June. The right hand has no idea what the left hand is doing. It's just unbelievable. If a private business tried to run their business like that, it'd have been just as disastrous as what's going on at Department of Labor. You know, #1 in the country for fraudulent claims. We're probably #1 in the country for folks that really need legitimate claims paid. That's not happening. I mean, it's so sad that we can't address these. We did approve a new secretary, and got to give her a chance here, you know, and I'm hopeful that she will be able to get things, you know, turned around. And you know, we just got to give her a chance to try to get things straightened back out. But I told her when I interviewed her, you know, for confirmation, I said the first thing I would do, I would make sure every one of them got their vaccination. I'd say, be in your office in 2 weeks. Sit at your desk in 2 weeks, be there. Here we are. We're talking June maybe.
I might put my business hat on for a moment at owning businesses in Kansas. I had at least 25% of my employees who had the fraudulent 1099 forms, and we would send in monthly stating these folks still work for us. And then the next month they'd still be on there. So I fought that as a business owner. And then even my husband and myself had fraudulent claims. So I've always advised the people who called in to put credit alerts on the 3 credit bureaus, that so you knew that your account could be tampered with more easily now. So there were some proactive things that we were able to do to tell people to put the alert on their names at all 3 of the credit bureaus, and including myself. So I know what that process is. So I'd say to the people calling in, okay, this just happened to Charlie and me. Now this is what I did. This is what you need to do. So having lived through it as a business owner, I truly feel the frustration of the people too.
We might mention just real briefly too, if someone has a fraudulent claim against them, they need to go and try and contact Department of Labor to get a 1099-S, so they are not responsible for the funds that have been paid out in a fraudulent claim.
And I know you have a call too, Jay, but something they put in the budget, which is really smart language. If you could not pay your bills, you could go to the Department of Labor and get a letter stating, because I wasn't paid in a timely manner from the state due to the complications within the Department of Labor, they now can have a credit letter to take to their creditors or to the credit bureaus. And that's very smart, a very smart move to do.
We've got a caller here on line 1, Jeremy from Samarin. Good evening, Jeremy. What is your question? Jeremy, are you there? We just lost him. Any other thoughts on Department of Labor unemployment issues, Representative Waymaster?
I was going to mention that part that Elaine mentioned in regards for these individuals who did not receive timely payments from the Department of Labor, of having the ability to go to their financial institution or the credit bureaus to fix any credit marks that they might have due to the fact that they were not able to receive their unemployment benefits. You know, this was, I brought it up to you because a member of the House actually came up with it, and we talked about it like 2 days before we finalized the budget in conference. But it was a very practical move, and
very smart.
And it's actually going to be helping a lot of Kansans who are going to have, when this is all said and done, and then they try to go get a job. And this was her, when she was bringing it up to us, this was her example. Let's say somebody did have unemployment, they got credit marks on their credit bureau, then they went to go file for, or apply for a job at a bank where they pull your credit, and they had poor credit and they didn't get the job. And so that was just one example of how that could impact a fellow Kansan. And so we wanted to put that into place so it would not have that. The other thing is, and when Rick was talking about just confirming the latest labor secretary, I think from last year there's been 4 different secretary of labor in just the last year. So that just goes to show the disarray that was going on with that department, when in less than a year you had 4 different head changes within that particular department.
I think Jeremy is back there on line 1. Jeremy from Cimarron, good evening. What is your question?
My question is, as I was on, I got a letter for my PUA and was qualified, and then I got disqualified, and then I got requalified and disqualified, and I can't get a straight answer from the Department of Labor, and I'd like to know when I'm ever going to get paid.
Senator Bowers?
If we could get some more information from him offline, we can help. Yes. So perhaps.
Yeah, we'd encourage you, Jeremy, to contact your legislator. And for Cimarron, not sure the representative who that would be.
He can contact
Any of us, yes.
Yeah.
So here's what we need, because we do get blanket emails too, but the last 4 of a social security number, a good working phone number, those are 2 important, and full name, and then it helps us to know where they live. So that's the data that gets us started. But if he went to the legislative website, he can go to the roster and find any of us and click on our link and send an email directly to us. But we can put him in touch with the right people.
Great, good. Let's talk about vaccinations a little bit. Vaccinations are readily available, now been approved for, I believe, down to the age of 12. So 12 and above, plenty of supply, but the concern is demand. Demand has been tapering off, and we're not really at herd immunity levels yet. I think the state of Kansas, right smack in the middle, about 52% or so of Kansans have had at least 1 dose if it's a 2-dose vaccine. How do we, and how do you folks as elected officials encourage the public to go out and get a safe and effective vaccine so we can get herd immunity and kind of move on from this? Senator Billinger, you want to take that first?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern with folks, and I think probably one of the things that works right into that is, a lot of folks were concerned about getting it and being injured and so forth. But then after folks got the vaccine, they continue to wear a mask. And I think a lot of people were, well, if it doesn't work, why should I get it? And I think just in the last day or so here, they finally come out and said, hey, if you've been vaccinated, you can do away with the mask wearing. So I'm hopeful that might help.
Yeah, I've read something that it may encourage folks now that the CDC has come out and said, look, basically in any situation, indoor and outdoor, you don't have to wear a mask if you're fully vaccinated. Is that the kind of thing we need, or is there a messaging component here to encourage the public? There was concern initially, but we haven't seen any real evidence that of any bad side effects or enduring side effects to the vaccine. How do we encourage the public to get that vaccine, Senator Bowers?
Well, I do think the second shot scared people, where folks heard that they were going to be sicker on the second one. And maybe some that we've heard back from, but not necessarily. So that scare is gone. So originally, when the vaccine first came out, the senior citizens were lining up in our counties to get those. So once that was addressed, then the next problem I discovered was the eastern side of my district wanted more than the western side of the district, and that's Marshall County to Phillips County. So it's a regional feel to me as well. When I saw some of these communities having like a blood drive, but they'd have the vaccine drive. So they would have everyone could come in at any time. So scheduling an appointment was difficult. And before that, some folks could go to the pharmacies and get a shot. So the accessibility, I think, is a big part of that as well. And it was regional too, that We in Topeka understood the value of it being in the building altogether. So it was offered to state employees, and there wasn't that hesitation that I've seen in different parts of the district.
And for all evidence out there, a pretty effective rollout logistically. We've done a pretty good job
The phases, yes.
nationwide in terms of research and development, and then the rollout of this vaccine. Thoughts, Representative Waymaster? How do we encourage the public to get herd immunity and move on?
Well, the one thing I would say, and I think all three of us for quite some time have been receiving emails in regards to not only the COVID-19 vaccine, but other vaccines. They're against having their children take them. They're against themselves taking them. So, I mean, you just have, personal beliefs that someone is going to make the choice that they don't want to take the COVID-19 vaccine for whatever reason that may be. But for, like, Senator Bowers was saying, for those of us when we were in the legislature, we were spaced out in the House. The Senate was still in close proximity to each other, but in the House, we had a desk in between each member. And so there's no public allowed in the galleries because House members had to sit up there. And so it wasn't until all of us were vaccinated that we were able to go back to our normal seating arrangement on the House floor. One of the other ways, I think this is kind of confusing, as Senator Billinger was talking about, obviously recently with the new guidance from the CDC saying that if you're fully vaccinated, then you don't need to wear a mask. But then again, if, let's say, Walmart stops dropping, or they start to drop their mask policy, how are you going to know if that individual is fully vaccinated or not? I mean, do they have to show their vaccination card? I mean, what is going to be the gamut of showing whether or not you're vaccinated or not? So there's confusion out there because people are like, well, I don't have to be vaccinated and I don't have to wear a mask. So it needs to be more streamlined on exactly how we want to address, one, the mask policy, and two, whether or not you need to wear a mask or not if you're fully vaccinated. I think the confusion in the last couple of days from the CDC, it seems very cut and clear, but I think it's generating more confusion as the days go on.
Yeah, there was some concern that I think Trader Joe's just dropped their mask policy. I just saw on the news, and there was some concern that folks who hadn't been vaccinated may just very well carry on. I think that goes back to the issue, though, of vaccines being important and the public messaging there of a safe and effective vaccine so that herd immunity can be achieved. That seems to be what we need to solve that problem. We've got a caller here on line one. We've got Jen from McPherson. Jen, good evening. What is your question?
Hello. Yes, good evening. I'd like to ask, is there anything coming down the pipeline on probably doing away with the taxes on food and on medicine and medical supplies? Is there anything in the offing that's going to be done with that?
Thank you, Jen. Good question. I mentioned sales taxes. We have a fairly high one. Why not take out food, medical supplies from sales tax as opposed to decoupling? The argument here is that it would affect a larger population of Kansans to do something with regards to the sales tax. Senator Bowers?
Well, speaking to two legislators who live along the border of Nebraska, we totally understand this as well. And many times this has come to us as an amendment to remove, or at least reduce, sales tax on food. I don't know the last time it was reduced, but it always comes down to the fiscal note, and that's when it comes to the budget. And perhaps the fellows can remember what 1% drop is, how many millions of dollars. So it does seem to come down to the money. I'm fully in favor of the medical, absolutely too, but buying down the food sales tax hasn't been successful in the past years too, but it's been attempted every year, and I don't recall a conversation this year strong in the tax committee on it, but we do hear this along the border of Nebraska too, where we live, and I voted for it every time it's come up as an amendment because I see it as important too, but perhaps as our fiscal position becomes stronger, that is something we can look at in the budget process as well, and building it into the governor's budget next time as well.
Representative Waymaster, thoughts on sales tax?
When you were talking about the fiscal note of that, if we would totally eliminate the sales tax on food, just food, not medical supplies or anything like that, on food, you're looking at anywhere from $300 to $400 million as a hit to the state budget. As I mentioned prior in the beginning of the show, Right now, with the budget that we passed, we're sitting at a $514 million ending balance. So if we would have done that, it wouldn't have left a very large, healthy ending balance for the state of Kansas, not where we want to be. It's obviously a discussion that we can have, and we've had this discussion many times. Actually, last year, I think in the tax bill, we did have a reduction in state sales food tax that was vetoed. And so it was in there. It wasn't, in my opinion, it wasn't much of a reduction, but it was some kind of reduction in regards to food sales tax. But it was also with that decoupling component, which the governor didn't like, and that's why she vetoed it. It's an ongoing conversation that we're always having. I mean, I represent individuals in Smith and Jewell County, and they go to Nebraska to purchase items, purchase food, then they end up purchasing items when they're there because they're already getting 0% sales tax on food and they're already there, so they'll buy other items there as well.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing issue.
Senator Bellinger, thoughts on the sales tax?
I'm not like.
We got about 1 minute left.
Sure. I'm like Elaine. I've supported it every time, and I will continue to support it. And I think at some point in time, we'll just have to go slowly. I mean, maybe we do 2 cents, and maybe that's 100 million or 90 million or 80 million, and just slowly through the process. But yes, it's a discussion. It wasn't really much of a discussion this year, but it has been a lot in the past. And I think it's something we need to look at. I have counties not only in Nebraska, but Colorado. Colorado's zero on groceries, Nebraska's zero on groceries. So it makes it pretty tough for our local grocery stores along the borders.
Great. Well, a good discussion. Nice set of topics that we discussed here on our final show of the legislative session of 2021. I'm Jay Steinmetz. Thank you for coming on, and we'll see you next time, folks.
Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, cooperative members working together to generate power so you can enjoy the benefits of life in central and western Kansas. Sunflower Electric Power Corporation, energy done right.